My name is Sophia, and when I think about my childhood, I see pictures of simple and happy days filled with warmth and tranquility. Our house, small and cozy, was a whole world for me, where everything seemed stable and understandable. My parents, both hardworking and humble people, worked at the local factory, which seemed to have become the heart of our small town. Every day they went on shift, and I knew that in the evening they would return home, tired but happy, because their work brought our house the most necessary things: food on the table and a roof over our heads. These everyday life were measured and familiar, like the warm flow of a river, and as a child, I perceived them as something eternal and unshakable. In the evening, my mother put simple but delicious dishes on the table, which she cooked with special love. Dad, tired after a long day at work, still found the strength to tell me a story, sometimes about his childhood, sometimes about his dreams. He could tell in such a way that his simple words came to life in my imagination. I saw the world through his eyes, and it seemed to me that his past and future were closely intertwined with mine. But in life it happens that trouble creeps up unexpectedly, violating the most intimate ideas of safety and tranquility. When I turned 6, something happened that none of us could have foreseen. The factory that had been feeding our family for so long suddenly went bankrupt. For me, a little girl, this event was incomprehensible, as if the words bankruptcy and unemployment themselves were a mystery that eluded my childhood consciousness. But I could clearly feel the changes in the air, the tension that emanated from my parents, the piercing silence that filled our house. I remember that night as if it were yesterday. We were sitting in our tiny living room, where Dad used to read the newspaper and Mom would knit or play board games with me. But this time it was different. Mom's face looked sad, her eyes were red, although she tried to hide her tears behind a strained smile, as if she believed that she could protect me from grief by hiding her feelings. Dad, usually confident and calm, was nervously twirling his wedding ring. His gaze was fixed somewhere in the void. I don't remember seeing him like this before. "Sophia, darling," my mother said softly, and her voice trembled, as it happens when sadness is hidden behind words. "We need to tell you something." I knew that what she would say would be important, even if I didn't realize how much. She chose her words carefully to explain to me that the factory where they worked had closed and they now had nothing to earn a living from. Dad, who usually spoke little and only to the point, suddenly added that he had an old friend in another state who offered them a job. "They will be forced to leave our house, but this is temporary. They will return soon." The words "soon" and "temporarily" sounded reassuring, but at the same time I felt the anxiety they were trying to hide from me. "You're going to stay with Grandma while we sort this out," Mom added, her voice strained like a taut string. She kissed me on the forehead, and it seemed to me that her tears were touching my skin, leaving a bitter imprint. She assured me that it wouldn't be for long, that we would be together again soon, and I just needed to be patient a little bit. The next morning, trembling with a mixture of fear and expectation, I entered my grandmother's house. This house seemed like a different world to me. The aromas of freshly baked cookies and medicinal herbs always hovered in it, which created a kind of warm calm in my soul. Grandma greeted me with a soft smile and hugged me tightly, trying to calm me down. She told me that I would sleep in her old room, showed me the tiny glass figurines that she had kept since she was young, and her old ceiling fan turned gently, filling the room with a slight rustle and a familiar rhythm. She did everything possible so that I would not feel lonely, cooked my favorite dishes, read the same bedtime stories that she told my mother as a child. But no amount of her efforts could replace my parents. I missed their voices, their warmth, our small, familiar life. My parents called me regularly. At first, every evening, they talked about their first days in a new place, how things were going, and swore that they were working for a better future for all of us. They said that these were just temporary difficulties, and every conversation gave me hope that they would return soon and everything would be as before. Over time, their calls became less frequent. At first, they talked to me every few days, then every week, and finally, I began to wait for their calls as something rare and almost unusual. Every word of my parents was like a gift to me, and their promises began to take on a shade of ghostliness, as if something was gradually slipping away, dissolving into time and distance. I was 10 years old when, to my surprise, my parents suddenly appeared on my grandmother's doorstep. I remember my heart beating faster. Doesn't this mean that they came back for me, that I will finally be able to feel the warmth of their presence again, to hear Mom's stories and Dad's rare, but such important words? I stood in the doorway, hardly breathing, overwhelmed by a wave of joyful assumptions, while they silently hugged my grandmother, and then carefully brought into the house the baby, my 2-year-old sister Sarah, clinging to her mother's leg, as if her life depended on this leg. Joy was quickly replaced by misunderstanding, and then by aching disappointment. They didn't come to take me home, as I dreamed, but brought Sarah to leave her with her grandmother too. They tried to explain it logically and distantly, as if they were solving a purely business issue. Mom spoke in a tone as if not trying to soften the cruelty of her words. Their business requires too much time, and raising children requires even more, and, in her opinion, the main thing now is to focus on their common future. Dad, his voice insinuating and serious, persuaded Grandma that they would send enough money to take care of me and Sarah. He confidently said that the money would be enough for Grandma to even hire an assistant if she needed help with us. Grandma's reply was quiet but firm, as if hiding a bitter regret. She said that if they decided to do this, it would be better to make everything official, no informal arrangements. Her voice was harsh, and her words echoed in the house in a long silence. My parents, with their trademark carelessness that somehow seemed alien and detached, signed the papers transferring their parental rights. It happened quickly, as if they were making another deal rather than making a fateful choice about their children. And so, from that day on, Sarah and I became real grandmother's children, and the parents who came only for a while left our house, as if driven by some invisible force. The first nanny my grandmother hired was Mrs. Peterson, a gentle and caring woman in her 50s, with a kind smile and gentle manners. She seemed to be the perfect person to take care of Sarah, but in reality everything turned out differently. As soon as I left for school, Sarah would start screaming, her little face would turn purple, her hands would reach out to me, as if her salvation depended only on my presence. Mrs. Peterson survived for exactly 2 days. With her things packed, she said goodbye to us, apologizing for her inability to cope with little Sarah's anxiety. Other attempts followed, but one after another they ended in failure. Grandma tried to hire a variety of nannies. Each came with good recommendations, each seemed capable and kind, but none lasted more than a few days. Sarah threw herself on the floor, was hysterical, hid under furniture, doing everything possible to avoid an unfamiliar face. She recognized no one but me, and her only wish, her mantra, was the word Sophia, which she repeated with despair and the belief that it could change something. I remember one day Miss Rodriguez, our third nanny, tried to read Sarah a book to entice her. Sarah looked at the book in silence, and then, with sudden fury, she threw it across the room and ran to me, sobbing. She wrapped her tiny arms around my legs and, through her tears, pleadingly uttered her usual, Sophia, as if one word could drive away all strangers, make the world become safe again. From that moment on, I began to take on more and more responsibility for Sarah. I was only 10, but I already knew how to change diapers, cook simple meals for her, help her wash and put her to bed. At first, the money that Mom and Dad sent came generously and regularly. Monthly transfers covered all needs, and Grandma could afford to keep trying to find a babysitter. We had enough money for new clothes, quality food, and even some small pleasures. Sarah's room was strewn with educational toys that came in packages from her parents, and on my 11th birthday they sent me a brand new bike. It seemed to me that, despite their physical absence, they still remained a part of our lives, that their love could be measured by gifts and money transfers. But something has changed over time. At first, the money began to arrive irregularly, then their amounts began to decrease. Sometimes the transfer did not come at all. The parents' explanations were as vague as their promises to return. They talked about temporary difficulties, that business requires investments, that the market is unstable. Listening to this, I couldn't help but feel bitterness and resentment, because what had once been temporary difficulties seemed more and more like the usual state of their lives, a life in which there was less and less room for us. For the first time since losing my grandmother's support, I felt my life begin to level out, as if some heavy burden that I had been carrying on my shoulders for so long finally allowed me to straighten up and take a deep breath. Working at Marshall Trading, which started as a simple junior salesman, gradually brought me experience, stability, and most importantly, the opportunity to support myself and Sarah. From that very first paycheck, I learned to appreciate every little thing, because now I knew what it was like to live, counting every dollar, knowing that tomorrow might depend on it. During the first years, I put off my own dreams for later. College remained a distant, almost mythical goal, and I allowed it to become that unfulfilled promise from which not much was expected, but which still warmed my soul. My new reality consisted of shifts at Marshall Trading, meetings with colleagues, endless routine tasks that had to be completed. Jenny, my colleague, loved to tease me, always shaking her head admiringly. "Sophia, you don't live at all, you work. Youth is given for something more than endless reports and fundraising for someone else." Her words seemed to touch on a distant, almost alien truth, which at that time seemed unattainable to me. Every dollar I could spare, I sent to the so-called future fund for Sarah, and it became not just a duty for me, but almost a sacred obligation. I saw in her the part of me that I could have been if my parents had stayed, if my grandmother had lived longer, if I hadn't had to take on adult responsibility so early. I continued to work hard, gritting my teeth, content with what was on the table, as long as Sarah did not feel a shortage in her life. And even if it meant wearing clothes from thrift stores and making do with simple meals, I was happy because Sarah grew up believing that she had a chance at something more. When that day finally came, and Sarah received the letter of admission to the University of Riverside, I almost burst into tears. It was an incredible feeling to see how all my hard work, all these years and sacrifices, seemed to finally pay off. Even if it was a partial scholarship, even if we couldn't afford the payment anyway, but I knew that I wouldn't let it interfere with her dreams. I'd spend the rest of my life working if it meant Sarah would get a chance. And so, when she left, and I stayed at my grandmother's house again, it seemed that life had changed again. By that time, Marshall Trading had acquired new owners, and soon a new CEO appeared in the office. Michael, as I saw him for the first time, was not at all the typical businessman who could be in such a high position. He was good-natured, friendly, and, what surprised me especially, he was sincerely interested in the opinion of his employees. He began to notice me at meetings, stopped by my desk to discuss projects, and soon his interest in me began to go beyond work issues. The day he invited me to dinner was one of those rare moments when I felt special. I was so far from thinking about my personal life, so caught up in my obligations, that I forgot what it means to be a girl who gets attention. "Sophia," he said with a slight hesitation, "I know it's not really professional, but I'd really like to get to know you better outside of work." He was smiling nervously, and for the first time in years, I agreed to go on a date. Our relationship developed slowly and somehow at home. Michael respected my devotion to Sarah, never rushed or pushed me. He was always there, understanding and supportive. A year later, surrounded by several close friends, we were quietly married in the courthouse. Contrary to everyone's expectations, we decided to stay in my grandmother's house. For me, it was not just a building, but a part of the past that I did not want to lose. Michael understood me, and we enthusiastically set about refreshing the house, giving it a new lease of life. I suddenly felt like the Sophia I could have been if life hadn't thrown up unexpected difficulties. His support allowed me to gradually accept the opportunity to live for myself. Soon I allowed myself the first luxury. I bought a designer handbag, and this seemingly small event became for me a symbol of the freedom that I deserved for myself. Saren's graduation was an event that I was looking forward to with special trepidation, almost as if it was a continuation of the path that had once been started for her, for both of us. I've been imagining this day since she entered the university. Crowds of students in black robes, joyful faces, bouquets of flowers in their hands, congratulations and keepsake photos. It seemed to me that I would be there next to her, see her proud smile, support and congratulate her, as a family should. But, contrary to these expectations, the day came and went, leaving behind a strange feeling of emptiness and bitterness. There was no invitation, not a single call or message from her, as if I did not exist at all at this important moment for her. At first, I tried to justify her silence. She was probably busy, maybe nervous, and had completely forgotten about me, but still, deep down, I knew that these were just excuses that I was trying to console myself with. All day I held the phone in my hands, mentally persuading it to ring, as if by sheer force of desire I could call her to me, remind her of our unbreakable, as I thought, union. Evening came, then night, but the phone did not ring with her voice. All I had to do was look at her Instagram in the hope of seeing at least a grain of her life, to find out how the graduation went, who she was with on that important day. But even there, I was only disappointed. There was only one picture on the page, Sarah in a robe, her face beaming, but no friends or family nearby. It's just that she's in front of a crowd of other students, with an unsigned inscription, finally. These words, taken out of context, seemed cold and lifeless, as if someone else had put her in front of the camera and taken a picture, for the sake of form, for the sake of simply fixing this moment. This photo told me that something had irreparably changed. Scrolling down her profile, I sank deeper into painful thoughts. She never shared her plans, her emotions, or what worries her, what she lives by every day. Her profile has become mute, almost sterile, a few ordinary pictures with cups of coffee, pages of textbooks, rare selfies, almost impersonal, as if she put a screen between us that shows nothing. Every day I wanted her to explain her detachment to me, but the more I looked for reasons, the deeper the gap that separated us became. I began to remember all our conversations, those rare moments when she shared something personal. I tried to remember if I had missed something important in her words, if I had given her the warmth she craved. Didn't she think then that I was too withdrawn in my duties, that I was forgetting that she needed not only financial support, but also simple intimacy and trust? The words Sarah said in our last conversation about parents echoed in my mind. She said that people tend to change, but then I dismissed her words as childish naivety, unable to see the pain and disappointment that their betrayal brought to us. And yet, perhaps, in her words there was not just naivety, but a true desire to believe that once lost relationships could be revived again. I pushed these thoughts away from me, but the more I thought about it, the heavier it became on my soul. My heart was tormented by doubts, bitter and painful. I remembered over and over again how I tried to raise her in love and care, becoming her sister, mother, and even an older brother. I gave up my personal life for her, the time I could devote to myself. I saw in her not just a younger sister, but almost my reflection, dreams that I did not allow myself to realize. I wanted her to become the part of me that I could not realize, and this care became for me the highest duty, something sacred and undoubted, But Sarah seemed to think differently now. The distance between us was like a slow disappearance, as if behind an impenetrable veil. She no longer needed my advice, did not call me for help. Her life flowed away, to where I was just a shadow of her past. The moment I saw these photos, it was like something snapped inside me. The world spun before my eyes, and I felt everything around me lose its outlines. I had an unbearable, almost painful realization, all these years, when I thought that Sarah was as lost as I was, when I believed that she needed me, that our unity was sealed by the common suffering and bitterness of losing her parents. It turned out that she had a completely different life. She lived with them, celebrated with them, accepted their love and care, the very ones they deprived me of as soon as they disappeared from our lives. In the photo at the expensive restaurant, Sarah stood between our parents, hugging them, her face beaming with happiness. There was no trace of the detachment that I saw in her profile when she put up rare pictures of coffee cups and books. Her smile was sincere and radiant, and her eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was the smile of a beloved daughter surrounded by care and attention. I couldn't take my eyes off the signature. I am so grateful to my wonderful parents who gave me everything I could have dreamed of. Every word echoed in my soul with pain, burning me from the inside. How could she so ruthlessly and easily cut me out of her life? Why did she let me believe that we were together in this struggle, that her silence was a sign of her own loss and pain? I was frantically flipping through the pictures, my hands were shaking as if from the cold, and my thoughts were randomly flashing through my head. In each photo, they were smiling, sitting at richly set tables, raising glasses of champagne, noting the very moments that I had been inventing in my head for years, imagining what it would be like if they stayed with us. All this time, while I was watching her empty account, hoping to catch at least a shadow of her real life, Sarah lived with them, hiding nothing but her truth from me. I remembered her every refusal, every "I'm too busy" when I offered to meet. These words, which once seemed to me a sign of her diligence and focus on her career, were now just excuses. She created an invisible wall between us, leaving me with the illusion of her closeness, while all her attention was focused on the other side of this wall, on the side where our parents were alive and well, where her support. My pain turned into anger, dull and inexpressible. How many holidays, how many birthdays, graduations she spent with them, laughing and hugging them while I stayed at home, sitting in my grandmother's empty house, with a sense of guilt and responsibility that became the only reason for my existence. They celebrated her every step, every achievement, while I spent sleepless nights counting the remaining money and figuring out how to make ends meet so that she could study and live a decent life. I didn't know how to deal with this pain, this devastating knowledge. Michael put his hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt his touch. Only one thought swirled in my head: I was told to love, protect, and take care of her, no matter what. I devoted my life, my youth, my dreams to her, and it all turned out to be an unnecessary burden that I alone dragged along all these years while they all enjoyed each other. Each photo was like a punch that I couldn't dodge or fend off. The photos of them choosing wedding dresses together, eating in expensive restaurants, traveling to exotic places, each frame seemed to mock me, tearing apart the reality that I had been building for myself and for her for so long. I was sure that despite all the difficulties in life, despite their betrayal, Sarah and I would always have something inseparable. My whole life, all the years spent in worries, hopes, protecting memories, and making them a shield from loneliness, collapsed when I heard her words, harsh as slaps in the face, cold and prickly like a winter wind. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, clutching the phone as if it were the last bridge connecting me to her, to someone I considered a part of my world, who was the meaning of my youth, who was for me not just a sister, but the meaning of life. But her words erased everything I knew and loved. She seemed to have easily discarded all the memories of our childhood, of me, of the sacrifices I made, of the missed opportunities, of all the days and nights when I was alone so that she could move on. "You're only embarrassing me, Sophia," her voice, calm and cold, continued to ring in my head like an evil mockery. Her last words, with honed contempt, seemed to be imprinted in my mind forever. My fingers loosened, the phone fell out of my hands and fell to the floor with a thud, but I barely noticed it. Standing in dead silence, I felt nothing but a monstrous emptiness corroding my soul. I slowly sank to the floor, my hands clasped my head, and everything that I had been holding back for a long time burst out in uncontrollable sobs. All those resentments, all the restrained words, every feeling that I suppressed, dissolving into caring for her, burst out like a stream bursting a dam. Tears poured down my cheeks, fell to the floor, and it seemed that nothing could stop this pain that squeezed me from the inside, destroying the last hope that maybe we still have a connection with her, that, no matter what, we are still a family. At that moment, I heard soft footsteps, and, raising my tear-stained face, I saw Michael. He came up to me slowly, with a knowing expression in his eyes, in which there was neither surprise nor pity, only pure, human compassion. He sat down next to me, hugged me, gently pulling me to him, allowing me to hide in his arms, where there was neither condemnation nor misunderstanding. I could feel his hand gently stroking my shoulders, and his breathing, smooth and warm, as if trying to lull me to sleep. His shirt was quickly soaked with my tears, but he stayed close, whispering quiet words of comfort that did not require an answer, and I would not have been able to answer anyway, overcome by endless pain. "I heard everything," he said softly, trembling slightly from the gravity of the moment. His voice was as flat as ever, but I could hear the quiet pain in it that he shared with me. "You don't deserve this, Sophia. You deserve a lot more than she can give you. I'm here, I'm with you." My tears flowed more and more, flooding his shoulder, but he continued to hold me, not letting go for a second, not saying a word, not saying that I needed to calm down or cope with myself. Michael just let me vent everything that had accumulated over the years, every suppressed disappointment, all the pain that I hid behind routine responsibilities, worries, and duty. The tears continued to flow until my strength left me, and I clung to him, breathing heavily, with the feeling that this man, the only one in a long time, was really close to me. When I finally realized what had happened, it was like watching the destruction of a castle built on sand. After the wedding, which ended in disaster, a few weeks later, I still felt echoes of those emotions that overwhelmed me during the live broadcast. James left Sarah at the altar, exposing her in the presence of all those people among whom she sought recognition and admiration. Before my eyes, her image of being brilliant, successful, and adored turned into bitterness and shame, exposing her pretense. I saw how our parents rushed to her, how my mother frantically tried to wipe the black streaks of leaking mascara from her cheeks, how my father looked around gloomily, trying to preserve at least a drop of dignity in this fragmented remnant, in a world that was collapsing before their eyes. And so, weeks later, when the news touched our family again, I found out that my parents' company had gone bankrupt. It was as if what happened at the wedding was just the beginning of a larger destruction that was waiting for them at every turn. I was sitting reading an article that described how they had maintained a semblance of prosperity for many years, using huge loans and evasive maneuvers to maintain their prestige and wealthy lifestyle. In an instant, all these illusions collapsed, leaving behind only a chaos of debts and unpaid bills. It all sounded like the last act of some tragedy that I had been watching from the sidelines for so long. I couldn't help but think that the appearance they had spent so much effort on was as fake as their parental love, which they were willing to give only in exchange for admiration and recognition. Now that this gilded shell had cracked, they could only reap the consequences of their actions. I thought of Sarah, who had neglected a real connection for so many years, and imagined how she was now left face to face with the consequences of her decisions, deprived of both luxury and those people who were devoted to her. But despite all this, I didn't feel triumphant. Even knowing about the bankruptcy in the fall, I couldn't be happy. There was only deep fatigue, emptiness, and the understanding that it was high time for me to let go of this story, this pain. Sitting in my grandmother's house, where I spent so many years, I looked at Michael, and in his eyes I found the only thing I really needed. It was a rainy, gloomy Sunday afternoon when they appeared on the doorstep, drenched and agitated, but without the former brilliance that could be seen in glossy photos on social networks. It seemed that all their sophistication, which was so vividly demonstrated to the world, had faded, and there was an insistence, almost despair, in their gaze. Mom, without waiting for an invitation, pushed open the door and entered the house, looking around as if she had returned to her possession. "We need to talk about what rightfully belongs to us," she said, turning to me with a mixture of annoyance and arrogance. She looked around at the manicured parquet floors and, narrowing her eyes slightly, said, "This house was supposed to be mine." I could barely keep from laughing sarcastically, surprised at this sudden outburst of concern for the house that my grandmother had considered her refuge all her life, a place full of warmth and memories. Sarah, tight-lipped and tense, followed her. I noticed that her shoes were no longer expensive Louboutins, but simple, albeit neat, but still more modest. She looked around the house as if assessing it, as if she saw it for the first time not as a cozy hearth, but as an object of property, and there was irritation and despair in her gaze. "I'm her granddaughter," she said, her voice trembling with unaccustomed anger. "She wouldn't want me to be left with nothing. I deserve my share too." Michael appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, his presence quiet but firm. He didn't say anything, just looked at them, his gaze remained calm, and there was no fear or confusion in it. He was here for me, and his support filled me with inner strength. I turned to them and, lifting my head slightly, said, "Have you remembered your grandmother's love only now that she can no longer give you anything?" The question sounded unexpectedly sharp, and I saw my mother's lips twitch as she licked them, not knowing what to say. I continued, barely restraining the flow of words that had been waiting in the wings for so long. "Years have passed, and you didn't care how my grandmother and I lived here, how I took on everything to give Sarah at least some chance for the future. And where were you? You were too busy to even answer my call." The father, who had been standing in silence until now, finally spoke, his voice sounding tired, devoid of the old confidence. "We're here about the inheritance," he said, lowering his eyes. "Your mother is right, this house should partly belong to her and Sarah. We are one family, Sophia." I walked around them and, without saying a word, went to my grandmother's old secretary, where I kept the most important things. Taking out the envelope, I returned to the living room and put it on the coffee table, unfolding the will. "This is my grandmother's will," I said quietly, "duly certified and witnessed. Let me read it out." I took a short breath before I started. "To Sophia's granddaughter, I leave all my possessions, including the house on Maple Street, all my savings and investments. She deserved it not only because she was my granddaughter, but also because she was the daughter I always wanted to be with, and the sister who gave everything for Sarah's well-being." When I finished, silence enveloped the room, and only the rain outside the window drummed on the glass, as an ominous accompaniment to our broken ties. "But it's not fair," Sarah exploded, her voice shaking with anger and panic. "You already have a husband who can take care of you. I have nothing now, no wedding, no money, no sister." I looked at her calmly, with restraint. "It was your choice, Sarah. You chose designer bags and luxury over family, you chose to be ashamed of me. Instead of being grateful, you chose money over love." Slowly but surely, I went to the front door and opened it, gesturing to the exit. "It's my choice now," I continued, without looking away. I choose to let go of people who remember their family only when they need something. Please leave my house. I closed the door behind them, and as soon as the click of the lock confirmed that they were no longer around, an unexpected sense of liberation hit me. I pressed myself against the door, closing my eyes and feeling the warmth and weight of Michael's arm wrapped around me, as if protecting me from the whole world. "Are you okay?" "What is it?" he asked softly, his voice soft and warm, like morning light. I smiled, feeling the calmness finally fill the void inside. "Yes," I whispered, genuinely feeling it. "Now I know who I am." It wasn't just words. For the first time in my life, I felt that I didn't have to worry about anything but myself and those who truly loved me. I no longer have to fight for love or try to earn it from those who have turned their backs on me. All this time that I took care of others, I forgot about myself, and now, as if released, I could finally devote my life to something real, something that I would choose. I went to the kitchen to make coffee and looked at the family photos on the shelf. These pictures captured happy moments that could not be returned, and yet I knew that not every family tree should be preserved in full. Sometimes you have to cut off dead branches so that the tree can grow again, becoming stronger and healthier. I was finally ready to let go of the past and focus on a new life, a life of my own choosing.